about storm relief.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a setup, but back in March, Missouri had bad storms fatalities. Arkansas had bad storms fatalities. Same system, actually. Arkansas puts in an application for relief. We put in an application for relief. We're still waiting for a response. Arkansas, Governor Huckabee Sanders, was told no. Kansas has put in a request for a storm since then, was told no. We're still waiting. I think Kentucky and a couple of other states are still waiting. Why, given the climate of saying no and waiting a long time, should Missourians have any confidence in getting any kind of relief out of this administration?
Well, I think, again, you have to look at these on an individual basis, because the storm that rolls through Arkansas isn't necessarily the one that hit Missouri, which isn't necessarily the one that hits Kentucky. So I think you got to look at the damage on the ground in each different state, and there are differences. And we're going to continue to press, of course, authored a letter with the rest of the congressional delegation urging the administration to release those FEMA funds. And so we're going to keep pressing on that. And then, of course, with what happened this past weekend, we're in the middle of that process. FEMA's on the ground. We've been in conversations with Secretary Noem. I spoke with President Trump myself on Saturday afternoon, Susie Wild as Chief of Staff, to talk about what happened in St. Louis. But to answer your question, we're going to keep pressing, and that's part of the job here. And I want to be as helpful as we can when people are in times of need like that, to get the resources they deserve. And a lot of that, Kermit, too, you got to remember, is on the sort of the public side. And making sure that there's reimbursements for infrastructure. So we always encourage the locals when this kind of thing happens to save all those receipts, because that goes into that property damage assessment along the way.
I'm wondering, though, how much of this is procedure and how much is policy. And I'm thinking back to January, after Donald Trump tours the hurricane area of Helene in North Carolina. And there was the big political scandal earlier there about some FEMA person telling the workers in the field, don't go to the properties that have Donald Trump campaign signs. And so he comes out of there with a sour taste in his mouth, and he steps in front of a microphone and he says, I think this should be the state's responsibility. Now, maybe that was just directed at North Carolina and sending a message, or maybe that's the new direction of this government and writing checks to states. Do you have any sense that that's in fact the situation?
Well, I do think there's a desire to reform FEMA and how those dollars go out the door. So, I mean, it kind of plays into the argument as people are frustrated with the slow-moving nature of FEMA. It sort of goes to the argument of you'd want to empower the locals and the states earlier, right? You'd want to get the dollars in their hands earlier. For example, earlier this year, there was some concern about a grant funding that wouldn't come through to respond to spring storms. We were able to get on the phone. I set up a conference call with Secretary Noem, the Region 7 FEMA coordinator, myself, and Governor Kehoe, and we were able to unlock those funds, $47 million, thankfully, and they've been able to do the things that they're doing right now, right? Have Task Force 1 respond, a lot of the highway patrol reimbursements for those sorts of things. So I do think FEMA is ripe for reform, and there is a better way to go do this. But right now, where we're at, we're going to advocate tooth and nail for Missourians who paid tax dollars to the federal government, and they deserve a response. So I think it is an important conversation to have about reform, but people deserve to get the help they need. And as we're doing this cleanup, those locals, deserve to get reimbursed. That's what we're focused on.
Now, Secretary Noem sat in a committee hearing yesterday and talked to your colleague Josh Hawley about FEMA dragging its feet. At the same time, we're getting reports out of Washington that FEMA's staff has been reduced by maybe a third, taking the president's buyouts and probationary people being let go. Is FEMA dragging its feet, or is FEMA in over its head?
Well, that isn't affecting any of those, workforce reductions aren't affecting the teams that are on the ground. So a typical team that you'd see on the ground, they're on the ground right now today, actually, Wednesday, in Scott County, in eastern St. Louis County, sort of in the Clayton area where the originally touched down, and then in St. Louis City where the bulk of those folks are. Their job is to do the initial property damage assessments, and so that's what they're going to be doing probably through Saturday. So we've gotten them to move expeditiously to make sure that the requisite number of people are on the ground in Missouri assessing, which then of course unlocks the reimbursement that comes from FEMA. So we're going to continue to press. I organized a call yesterday with our congressional delegation, the Region 7 FEMA folks, with the governor, also in the city of St. Louis, those folks, so they understood exactly what the process was going to look like. And so far, they're on the ground doing those assessments, but we're going to stay on them. There's no doubt about that.
And Kermit, unfortunately, we've reached our time limit with the center, so you have to say goodbye.
All right. Catch you next time, Senator.
All right, Kermit, thanks.